I'm Rick Skwiot, and I'm watching the Break It Down show.
Hell yeah. We're talking about Rick's book, The Bootlegger's Wife, and I hope you guys will take a look at that. We'll talk about that and some other books that he's written. But the place I want to start with you, Rick, is Key West. You used to live down there, and I always tell my friends, so I used to be a spy back in the Army days. And so when I go down, I notice things. And so you have in general in the Keys, you have the old kind of salty get away from me. I don't want air conditioner or drink warm beer fishermen who love tarpon fishing and that kind of thing. And that's why they're there, is just for fishing.
Well,
You have the, go ahead.
yeah, the conks. Yeah,
Yeah. You have special forces folks who are going through scuba school, which is crazy because it's a school where they
yeah,
drown you on purpose. You have
exactly. Yeah,
a collection of I guess you call it an enclave of folks who are trans and all different kinds of beings who are openly welcomed and walking around. You have just a collection of people there for drinking, for having a great time, for Hemingway. It's an amazing place to collect ideas and people for characters.
yeah, it sure is. And I have one book set in Key West. It's called Key West Story, which catalogs some of the things you just talked about. But it's a fascinating place, and beyond the people and the island, just the water there is beautiful for kayaking and snorkeling and free diving and whatever else you want to do. And it's a lovely laid back place.
Yeah. So yesterday I had a show with another author, and his inspiration place was Duluth, Minnesota. And nothing wrong with Duluth. I was just there about a week and a half ago on a little bit of a vacation, and it for sure inspired me with ideas. But if you're going to pick antitheses of cities, it might be Duluth and Key West.
Yeah, yeah, they don't have much in common except they're on the water, though.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, Duluth's on the side of a mountain. Key West is barely above sea level.
yeah,
But being by water, that's the big thing, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's good.
What kind of characters do you pull out of that place? Like, who stands out to you in this collection of people?
Of my current novel you're talking about?
Well, just in general, like when you go to a place like Key West, it's full of characters,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yeah.
What kind of things stand out that you're like, ooh, I'll collect some of this, I'll collect some of that.
Well, when I was hanging out there, I was playing a lot of tennis, and it was a meeting place for people from all over the world. From the old Soviet bloc countries, there are a lot of immigrants from there, a lot of people from the Pacific, people from Latin America, and from all over the States and Canada, a lot of Canadians there, and people from all walks of life. So you had people who were living rough under the mangroves. You had people who were multi-millionaires, and they all mixed and drank beer together on the tennis courts. It was quite a scene. People of all races and sexes and orientations and whatever.
Why does that work there?
It worked out fine. I think the demographics
Yeah.
are changing though. With the since the COVID thing and the influx of people from up north who have
Mm.
been escaping New York or Boston or Toronto or whatever, and so the
Right.
whole demographic is changing, and a lot of the people who were the stock and trade people who were fishing and chasing shrimp and working waiting tables and cleaning hotel rooms can't afford to live there anymore. So we're losing a lot of the characters and some of the interest.
Mm. Is that the same on No Name Key and fill in the blank key? All these different keys, is that the same all of them? Are they all kind of getting priced out?
Yeah, yeah. I have a neighbor here in Vero Beach, Florida, where I'm living now, who has just moved up from Tavernier, I believe it was, and she was saying that yeah, it's every place is getting pretty pricey, and alas, gentrified to a greater degree from the old fishermen and the drug runners and all the other people who made it sort of interesting.
Yeah.
One of my friends down there was a fisherman, lobsterman, but he also brought in some bales of marijuana from Mexico once in a while, and he went off for a stint in Club Club Fed, which was the prison there at the Air Force Base, at Eklund Air Force Base. And there's so many Key West our Keys fishermen down there, they had their own softball league. There's
That's
like
hilarious.
200 of them in prison at that time, back in the
Yeah.
70s, I guess it was. So anyway.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is funny because it's so true, but it's part of what made or makes still hopefully Key West so interesting is that you can sit next to a drug runner who's getting a little break from his work, maybe even his day job there locally, and then sit next to someone who came in from Canada. It's an amazing place. I hope it stays that way. That's kind of concerning to me that you think it's changing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it used to be pretty common that you could meet all those people, and a lot of the people who were working in the trades there and who are service workers too. It's just they can't afford to live there, so the whole ethic is changing on the island to some degree.
These folks that like to live wild out in the Keys and the mangroves, like on the water, that kind of thing, they live a very specific life. And you remember the show Flipper? I mean, it's sort of the same, not that different from back then, where you got a boat. And gosh, these people often are so fit. Like they're always in the water. They're always, diving and helping, fat, tourists and everything do the same thing. But, they don't want a bunch of gentrification. They want to keep their place a small, little, easy place. And by the way, anybody watching, whenever they worry about the Keys, like, oh, there's a hurricane coming, the Keys folks, they're not worried like that. They know how to survive it. They're built for that. And this tells me that if there's moneyed folks there who don't abide the rules, that they're going to struggle. We're like the folks who just know how to hunker down and withstand it. Yeah. That's a different breed.
Yeah, it is a different breed. And one of the great pleasures beyond the people down there was just being out in the water. And I didn't have a boat, but I had a kayak, and you get out a mile or two offshore, up island, up the Keys a bit, and get a mile or two offshore. It's just beautiful, pristine, clear water and beautiful clouds and birds and solitude.
Is that how you fill your story tank before you write, or what do you do to get yourself to sit? I want to go do what you just talked about, as opposed to sit in front of my Remington and bang away on keys.
Yeah. Well, all of my books grow out of places where I've spent a lot of time. I've got 3 books set in Mexico where I spent a lot of time during the 80s. I was trying to figure out how to write novels. So I got 3 books set there. I've got a book set in Key West where I live. I've got now 3 books set in St. Louis and the vicinity there. And maybe this is my second one. No, it's the third one. The Bootlegger's Bride is my 3rd book set in St. Louis where I grew up. And I have a childhood memoir from there as well called Christmas at Long Lake. And I've got another mystery set in St. Louis. It's based on the educational malpractice of the city schools there. But it's a murder mystery as well. So all my books come out of the places that I know intimately. And I've always thought that place, when I used to teach creative writing, I would tell my students is that for fiction, place determines character. You look at Hamlet or Huck Finn, they come from different places, but they are products of their environment. And so that environment determines character, and then the character determines the plot. And so there is some richness to all these places I've lived. And from those and from the people and the history of these places, that I'm able to tell some stories which I hope entertain people.
Yeah. Well, I was reading through Bootlegger's Bride, and everybody, there it is. There's the book. You guys know what I always say. Buy 2. There's the link down below. This is what we do. And get a book club started if you guys like it. The story reads as being inspired by some kind of event that you're aware of. Is this inspired by some kind of event that you're aware of?
Well, a lot of the events were things derived from stories I heard from my parents and grandparents when they were, they're all passed away now, but during Prohibition, and I was always intrigued by those tales of liquor running and gangland mayhem and the rest of it. And so I added to those stories a lot of research into what was going on back then. And I knew the neighborhoods intimately. Both my grandmothers lived in the North St. Louis area where the book takes place in large part. And my people were involved in prohibition, in bootlegging to a small degree. They weren't actually sellers, but my grandfather, for example, who's a Polish immigrant, was storing barrels of bootleg whiskey in his flat. That was until his wife, who was also an immigrant, and she was afraid of being deported, so she started sleeping on the couch until he got the whiskey out of the flat. And my father saw his next door neighbor gunned down while he was sitting on the stoop in front chatting with him. And a guy drove around the corner in a car, got out, shot him in the head, and drove off. Gangland killing.
Yeah.
And my mother was a little girl, but she was helping downstairs neighbors label bottles of bathtub gin. But all those stories seemed really, and the times just seemed really inviting and dramatic. And it was hard scrabble life too. People were fighting to, my immigrant grandparents were fighting to make a life for themselves. They had just come over and struggling to speak the language and work and to make a place for them. And it was that way for a lot of people in those days. Still is today, I guess.
Yeah. When you grow up in that kind of life, something that's, and I would, in this case, I would call it extra legal, right? Because you do it, and a lot of times it's overlooked. It's not enforced, because when I would go to combat zones, there'd be some guy selling, for example, bootleg gasoline, kind of a gray market thing. But he's not a problem. He's just trying to survive, right? And so even though in a very stable place with people having everything, they would have less impetus to do this, and also more control from them not to have it. When folks don't have enough, a lot of folks do things that they might not otherwise do that the government would say is illegal, but in reality, it causes less harm than the alternative of the government denying them completely that ability to do things.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that impressed me or inspired me hearing prohibition tales is how creative and inventive people are to circumvent the law, and how much general, let's not say disdain, but lack of respect for laws that are inconvenient. It's sort of American tradition to be your own man or woman and go your own way. And when things are not quite right, doesn't mean you should go gunning people down and taking what they have, but there's ways to get around certain governmental strictures, as everyone who fills out their income tax form knows.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at that sort of that outside the lines living that immigrants have to go through, that, bootleggers have to do. And by the way, bootleggers bootleg because there's people that want the product, right? And so there's this demand that has to be satisfied. Right. How do you inject what right and wrong looks like in this situation? And again, this comes from a guy where, like, hey, murder is legal here. It's war, and we kill people, and sometimes one person gets killed. That's war, right? So lines move for sure.
Yeah. Well, in the cases of the characters in this book, there is some ruthlessness that comes out. But for example, in the one of the main characters, the bootlegger, the title character, the bootlegger himself, Jan Nowak, is a young man who was kicked out of his home by his father because of what he was doing, getting involved in the bootlegging practice. So he was living rough and having to live in a basement hovel with rats, and still run his business and still try to make something out of his life. And so it drove him to do ruthless things. And there is and it wasn't things that he gleefully did, but he was trying to survive in an environment. So when you're faced with that sort of decisions in life, it drives you to do things that may be generally morally reprehensible to you, but still a necessity in some ways.
Yeah. How do you inject the good side of things let me think about how to say this. When you have these elements that have these nefarious things, and things like, shootings happen as they try to control the this explicit this market that's illicit. How do you also inject the government good that happens as you try to protect the bigger populace? I mean, it's a weird question, but there's many kinds of good, and they're fighting to try to do their version of good. How do you sort that out in a story like this?
Well, it's easy to do in fiction because you can make people do what they ought to do or make them into villains and make excuses for them when you want to. But and writing a novel is a messy business, and living a life is a messy business. And sometimes you have to do things that you're not proud of because you're trying to provide for your family or trying to take care of people who you're responsible for. So you can cut corners sometimes, and everyone cuts corners to some extent. And if you do it to a large extent, then that's bad, if it becomes a way of life. But everyone hedges and tries to put their thumb on the scale a little bit every once in a while, I think. Yeah. Maybe that's a dim view of human nature, but it's what I've been observing.
Yeah, I've met a number of warlords in my time, and what they've taught me is that everything's a competition, and sometimes you acquiesce because you can't take on every fight. And so the savvy warlords know when to exert their influence, and they have no problem going from calm to you're dead back down to calm, because that's the requirement of the job. And so you have two families competing or two interests competing. And if the stakes are life and death, then all of a sudden it gets real spicy, and you're trying to sort that out. And so again, like what right and wrong is becomes interesting, because in that world, they're playing in a world that doesn't make sense to someone living in Duluth, Minnesota, on a December afternoon or something.
Well, it's like our protagonist in the Bootlegger's Bride, one of the protagonists, the bootlegger himself, John Nowak. He's, as they say, living in this hovel, and he's also being his boss, who's the bootlegger, is importuning him sexually, and it could ruin his life in the community, and it could cost him his bootlegging job. And he has a decision to make, whether to run away and miss the opportunity he has to be a man of some consequence in the bootlegging world, or he could fix the problem. And it's his one chance in life to grab something and make something of himself, and he goes for it.
Let me ask you this. This is kind of fun too. When you see that brass ring, right, you're going to lean out and try to grab it. Is that really his only brass ring? Or if he was patient and stuck to what he was doing, he already had the brass ring in his hand? That's sort of the conundrum of life, right? Like, it's the only chance, this door only comes along once. There's all kinds of doors in life. You can always restart. You can do anything. Is this his one chance?
I'm on the side of taking a chance, and I could have sat around and had a nice life working as a PR man in corporate America if I had it. I did it for an aberrant 3 years after I left the newspaper reporting business. But I really wanted to be a creative writer, and I could have sat in my office for the next 30 years and retired very wealthy, but I might have always hated myself. So I took the other route and took some chances and had to live hand to mouth and support myself and try to teach myself, and to got some good education along the way from mentors and that as well. And so I didn't want to die not having fulfilled my destiny, or not taking a shot at grabbing that ring if I had to. And there's always the opportunity that even if you do take that chance, that you die completely unknown and unpublished with a bunch of manuscripts in your closet. It may never hit. You may never get lucky, or you may never rise enough to make anything out of that career. It's a tough career, tough field to do, particularly if you're writing substantive fiction, as I try to write, with its realism with some intelligence. And it's not genre fiction per se, although this particular book, The Bootlegger's Bride, has murder, it has a really touching love story, and it has a coming of age story too for the young son of the bootlegger who, without giving away too much information, it's a story about an orphan. You know, it's his coming of age and how to find his way in life. So there's something here for people who like to read mysteries, people who like to read love stories, and even for young people who want to read a coming of age story where someone finds his way because of certain connections in life and a transcendent love affair as well. So, yeah, all those things fit in there.
All of those things fit in there. Yeah. By the way, fellow cliff jumper, and I'm like, oh, is that an opportunity to take a risk? Here I go.
Yeah.
Like so. I get that, and I do look at the folks that had the ability to do the thing that was safe, steady, and they advanced, step by step through life. That's a viable path, but for whatever reason, some of us are wired in a way that's misery. And maybe you get over that and you smooth it down, that sticky spot where it's misery, and it becomes just life. But I definitely resonate with the opportunities of someone who's a bootlegger, and I'm going to go write novels or whatever it is. That's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah. And I know a lot of my colleagues and friends have families, and they're family men or women, and they've had to work and hold jobs down to do that sort of thing. And that just never was my path. It was not the path I chose because I couldn't afford to have a family if I was going to do what I was trying to do, because there's no money in creative writing, at least unless you happen to hit it big and have a bestseller and make some money. When I first started writing, I had some friends who were in the theater, and I did some work at a theater in St. Louis, and I got enamored with the stage. I'd had the good fortune to see some really fine theater in London and New York. So I tried writing for the theater for a bit, not successfully. I had one play staged in a community theater, but I was reading about playwrights in the United States. And at that time, there were, I think, 3 playwrights who were earning a living off it. 3 in the whole country. I think one was David Mamet, and one was Alex Wilson, and maybe one other. So it's like, Rick, you need to think about getting serious about what you're doing here, and maybe theater isn't the thing for you if you want to be a writer.
Yeah. I mean, that's a real thing. I always talk about going into the Barnes and Noble in downtown LA, and you look around, you're like, what the hell am I doing writing a book? There's already 100,000 of them in this place trying to be sold.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of plays, and there are a lot of people that already have the business set up where, hey, if you write something, we'll pay you this, but you have to write nonstop just to not make a living. I mean, that's a real thing. Same thing with acting and all these things that look wonderful. They're very hard to get away with.
Yeah, and like Mamet, even when he was having success writing for the stage, he went to Hollywood as soon as he had a chance and made some real money impact there, writing some screenplays and going for mass audiences rather than a place where there's 300 people watching it.
Yeah. There's also something within that too, the art versus the marketability, and you rarely ever find anybody who can blend both. Mamet's probably a guy who can blend both. We can write something that's purposely artful, but also marketed, and that's maybe, I don't know. I don't know. There's a reliable path to get to there, but the person who can just stock out hits, even minor hits, just repeatedly, that person makes money. That person gets to get their stuff. They also get in line in front of the guy who's like, I just want a chance. Like that guy's like, well, write the hits. That's what I do. And it goes back to sort of that government job drudgery. You're like, I don't want to write the hits.
Yeah. Well, I had some opportunities to go more into the commercial direction. I met a noted agent when I was living in Key West who had represented authors who had written these international thrillers and spy books and that sort of thing. And he read one of my manuscripts and he liked it. And he said, but these people you're writing about are schlemios. You need to make them into senators and secret agents and stuff. And he wanted to work with me, and he was going to supply some of the ideas, and I would work, write these books for him, and he had a lot of authors that were doing bestsellers. So I thought, this is not what I'm about here. I am doing this because I didn't want to write what other people were telling me to write. I want to do my own stuff. So it's a matter of where your heart is. My heart wasn't in making money particularly. And I've known authors who did that, but they went to start writing books with the idea of, I'm going to make some cash here. As much as one likes cash and likes to have adoration in that, you got to live with yourself too. And I've always wanted to, for whatever reason, create something that was fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank goodness for that. I mean, we need folks that are willing to take the shot and really sacrifice well-being in terms of financial or, any number of things to say, hey, I think I can write something special here. And like Van Gogh, I mean, Van Gogh is the ultimate example, had to beg for food and give away art that would now be worth millions and millions of dollars just to eat.
Yeah.
And now he is the name that people think of quite often when it comes to just painters and out of all of them,
Yeah, well, he was a little more self-destructive than I am, although I've had my moments. But it's good to be able. Well, and I have to admit too, although I've eschewed the corporate job and the formulaic books, I haven't really suffered that much. I mean, I lived for years in Mexico. I lived for 20 years in Key West. I'm still living in Florida, and I haven't missed any meals. So it's not like I'm in the garret and starving. So I managed to scrape by in the process, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Not done yet.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because I'm 55 and I start to look ahead, and I'm not the oldest guy in the world, but people my age drop dead. We just had Malcolm Jamal Warner die this week, right? He's 54, so basically the same age. He certainly wasn't planning on dying. So I look ahead and I think, wow, 15 years, I'm going to be 70. It's not the end of the world, but 15 years ago, it wasn't that long ago. It was 2010, and I'm like, wow. Time's a waste. And so I think about, I can still do, I'm trying to make movies right now, right? And I'm not actually fully made one yet, but we're deep into the process of development and production. I could have a whole nother career as a movie producer, but if I only made one movie in the next 10 years and I was thrilled with it and over the moon because all movies are miracles, that'd be a whole significant chapter of my life. But would I get another chapter after that? I don't know.
Yeah. The other thing too about this, Pete, that I don't mention very often, but writing a novel is the most pleasurable thing I've done professionally for myself in my life. And it's just something about being able to have that moment of creation where you create a story and people, as I have done with the Bootleggers Bride, who didn't exist beforehand. And they exist. They become flesh in these pages, and they live and they move other people to tears or emotion or joy or sadness or whatever in their actions. And I created all that, so you get this sort of godlike feeling of when you do it right, and that it resonates, and people can be in that room with these characters. It makes a big difference, and I like to do that. It's a pleasurable thing.
Mm-hmm. When are you already working on the next book yet, or are you still selling this and focused on this book still?
Just recently published on July 1st, actually. So we're still in the process now. Of doing promotional work. But I'm always working on something. I've got a couple novels that I'm working on now. They're both set in Florida, and so I'm always looking for opportunities for agents and publishers and readers. So it's an ongoing process. But it's, as I say, it's my greatest pleasure. So I'm not going to stop it until I have to.
I wouldn't say I'm a failed writer, but I write more as a hobby than as a product, because I can't reliably do it because I'm doing other things still that take me away from. But I do enjoy the act of sitting down and trying to explain or describe something. And of course, I have story ideas because everybody does. But I just love working on the craft, and for me, that might be as far as I ever get. I've got a bunch of failed books that I can go back to, reread, and being sparked, and write another 2,000 words into them pretty easily. But I struggle with the time because, again, I'm trying to make these movies, and they demand my attention more than anything else. I guess the thing I want to ask you about is I struggle to know where to put my effort and for how long in these projects. And within that, there's a whole different set of balances that you have to master.
Yeah.
How do you master all that mastery that's required to master the art of writing?
I would say write 5 million words over 40 years time, and maybe you can write something good. Get some good mentorship, get some honest readers, and learn the craft, learn how to do it, and learn what works. And one of the things that's so different about writing for the theater and writing the novels is that the theater are making the movies. If you're going to make movies, you just need to write dialogue, basically. You don't need to write, you need a plot and some dialogue. You don't need to put in all the furniture and the skies and everything else that's going on. But you got to do it in a novel because you want people to feel the emotion, and they get that emotion from the physical world that they're entering when they read a book. And it's a very private world. It's not like sitting in the movie and watching the movie and it goes by lickety split in front of you, frame to frame. But when you're reading a book, you can put yourself in that room. So to do that, a fiction writer has to put in all the sensory detail, what the room looks like, what the people look like, what the sky looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like. So they can share in the emotion that comes from those situations. When I was writing The Bootlegger's Bride, I went and read David Mamet's novel Chicago, which is set during Prohibition as well, just to see what he was doing. And he's a master at dialogue, and the dialogue in that book is beautiful. But he doesn't really, and I hate to criticize him because he's a fine writer, I respect, but he just doesn't put in all the upholstery and the sensory details that bring you into the place where it's going on, and which, when he's writing for the theater, he lets the director do that, and the stage manager and whatnot, put in the blocking and the furniture and the clothing and the sounds and all that. But so that's one of the things that really is part of the craft that a fiction writer has to learn, is how to make it real. And I try to do when I write, and dialogue's an important part always too, because that's action. But what my goal is, Pete, when I'm writing fiction, is to have the words disappear. Whenever the words whenever someone focuses on the words and say, "Oh, that's a beautiful sentence," or that's a nice word, it pulls them out of that dream world that you're trying to create. So I just want people to read that and be in that room and not have being focused on an intellectual or cerebral level. I want them to be there in an emotional level.
Yeah, I have a lot things to say about that. We all have different styles of reading and the things that we like, and you may not even realize what you like until you read things. The taste part is big. And so you just criticized Mamet a little bit. That I'm not going to bother saying his name, but there's a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist who is entirely too descriptive for me, and I'll mimic what he wrote. It's like, the sultry evening breeze blew gently on his, humidified curled hair and ruffled his nepentine, whatever kind of word he made up, windbreaker. And I'm like, just say it's a little breezy, man. Come on. Name checking brands also just pulls me out of the story, and I'm like, stop name checking brands.
Yeah, and you got to get rid of all those adjectives and adverbs. I mean, it's really deadly. When I was trying to write fiction, of course, Hemingway was an influence, which I loved his short stories. His novels, not so much, but the short stories, also. But another great influence on me was the French novelist Georges Simenon, who I think was the best-selling novelist in history. And he wrote hundreds of books, and a lot of them the mysteries, the Inspector Maigret novels set largely in Paris. But he had this method of writing which he called pointillism. It's like the Seurat paintings and all the others, where it's just a bunch of dots. He doesn't have any transitions. He has very few. It's hard to find adjective in his books, but they're just so full of emotion and intrigue and human struggle. And I learned from him, and he learned from the French writer Colette, who told him just cut, just keep cutting all the time and compressing and making it dense. And I try to follow that. So I try to watch out for those adverbs and adjectives and flowery language. One thing when I was teaching, I used to tell my students that when you start falling in love with a sentence or with something you've written, you better go back and have someone else take a look at it. Or even maybe the thing to do, if you happen to wake up in one of those mornings where you just hate yourself, when you're hungover and you hate the world, then go back and edit your book. When you have a jaundiced eye, and see if you're not falling in love too much with your own writing.
Don't fall in love with your own writing. Of course, that comes down to editors and having good, firm editors that help you clean up and keep your message clear, right? Because in the era of self-published books, and I'm just going to be a little bit unfair here. Oh, my wife edited my book. I'm like, that's not going to do it around here. I don't care how good your wife is. If your wife is an editor, sure. But even having your wife edit a book, you got to have a good relationship, because editors, until you build up that tough skin, editors cut deep. They cut to your heart, and you've got to be able to say, this person, and trust this person is making my story better. Not screwing up a semicolon that your wife, okay, that's nice, but editing a book is a different skill altogether.
Yeah, and I can always recognize good criticism when it stings.
Yeah.
Oh geez, you start blushing. Oh geez, it's the worst thing. How did I write that? But when it stings, I know it's on target. If I try resisting it, I know they've hit something I need to look at. Unfortunately, I've had some good friends and novelists. Some I met in Key West. A number of I met in Key West that have been. We read each other's work, each other's first drafts and whatnot, and try to save each other the embarrassment of actually publishing something that isn't ready. And God, I do so many drafts. I'm my own editor as well, so it's just
sure.
I can't tell you how many drafts I've done in this book, how many times I've read through it, hundreds of times.
Yeah, which is also amazing, because writing, reading for pleasure, reading to edit, reading to write are all different skills that require. I can read my own stuff over and over again. And you know how this works. It starts to all work and be perfect. The more I read it, I'm like, now we're getting there. But then if I unplug away from it, come back in and read those 10 pages again the next day, and I'm like, who wrote this nonsense? And I'm tough on myself, but it's so true that to read something 150 times, you'll know that story inside and out, and really no one else is ever going to read it as much as you do. And that's the fact, like you're going to read it the most.
Yeah. Hemingway said that every writer needs to have a built-in shock-proof BS detector. And if you're lucky to have that, you can probably write something. Yeah.
What kind of a writer are you in terms of your gait? Like, are you an iron ass guy? Are you I write 2 hours, take a break, go for a walk, smoke some ciggies, and then maybe sit down again, but maybe not. I just write until I'm, how would you describe your style of the production side of it? The actual hands on keys?
I think I'm waiting for divine inspiration of some sort, wherever that comes from. But when I'm working on a book, what I do, I write in the morning when I first get up, when my subconscious and my unconscious mind is still real active from my dream world, and I'm more sensitive. And before anything happens, I sit down and start working. And I usually start working on whatever chapter or whatever incident or whatever character that is foremost in my mind, what I'm enthused about. And enthusiasm is inspiration. That entails the God-given inspiration. So whatever enthuses me is what I try to work on. And I do it sporadically. I work until I'm not doing it well. I never work when I'm tired, where I'm not loving the work, where I'm not feeling well, because it's not going to be good work. I want to do it when I'm fit and strong and interested in the work. So,
yeah,
I do that kind of work in the mornings. In the afternoons, I would probably go back and do some critical editing when I'm a little more self-critical, perhaps, and do, like with this particular book, how many drafts it takes. It's a real sloppy process writing a novel, because I try to write them organically, and I want it to grow organically, and I don't want to impose anything from the outside. So it's a slow process, and everything, you make all these connections. And I know when I'm looking for something, when my plot's lacking something, or the character's not behaving in the right way, that somehow sooner or later something's going to click. I'm going to read something or talk to someone, and it's going to click. And it's this thing that the psychologist Carl Jung talked about. He coined the phrase synchronicity, that when you really need something, that something else is going to dovetail with it after a while, if you wait long enough or sensitive enough. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those things I need to really enrich and deepen the work and the character and the dialogue or whatever. And where it comes from, I don't know.
Yeah. Where it comes from, I don't know either. But when you do come across it, like my brother's girlfriend said a really clever thing one time, like she just kind of turned a phrase into something else, and I'm like, that's a song right there, Yeah. Like, I used to know what that tasted like, or something like that. You're like, oh, I used to know what that tasted like. Yeah, let me, and I'm just making that up off the top of my head. But you take something and then you can turn it. So do you collect these things and like maybe write a little something about it, or scratch it in a book, or what do you do with those moments of inspiration that show up?
Yeah, I do. I try to collect them and make notes on them and think about them. And one thing I've learned that a writer should never do is ever share any of that with another writer, because we're all snake grass, And if you share some good story, I mean, you'll find your most embarrassing moment that you revealed is going to end up in print somewhere else,
Yeah.
So you have to guard that material very, very carefully. But yeah, I'm always looking for good stories, and I will. And all writers are thieves, and I've been on both ends of this, where I've been a victim and a predator, So I know, what I'm saying here.
I love that. On occasion, I'll come up with the premise, and a lot of times I just write about baseball because I love baseball, and I can sit down and I can write out. And even most of those starts don't see the end. I always intend to finish them, but sometimes I'm like, I'm in a corner, I got busy, I put it down. But I don't always finish what I start. So that's the first thing to say. But I did recently sit down, and because I'll come up with the premise and I'm like, oh, that's good, and I'll write it in my phone. And it was, a guy who's at a diner who falls in just temporary love with the waitress, and it's never going to go anywhere. But like, you look at someone and you might, in this case, he goes off on a fantasy of what their next days would look like in their romance, and you don't finish it because the bill comes and you leave, and it's like, that was over. But we all have these daydreams. We all have these thoughts when we're overly critical or too positive about ourselves, and I just think it's a fun exploration to look at the human condition, because we all have things we wouldn't even say to our best friends because they're just too revealing about who we may or may not be, and we don't always like that person. When you have these different thoughts, even though the thought is not for anybody else anyhow, it's just you and your own internal experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. One thing I always did when I was trying to learn how to do all this stuff, I'd always have a pen and paper with me wherever I was, and I was noting stuff down. And I was a listener. I've always been a listener, and I think all writers are listeners rather than talkers, at least the ones I've been around that know what's what. They listen. That's how you learn, is by listening rather than talking. So listening and reading voraciously is another thing. And so I came from quiet people who read a lot, so that helped me.
Yeah, yeah. Reading is one of those things that you can always do more of. Maybe change up the pace, maybe change up the subjects, but you can always do more, and it will always pay the bills. It's I believe reading is like love, where the harder you lean on it, the more you get back from it, and it is not going to fail you. It's impossible for reading to fail, to give you something back that you love. You know, who was it? President John Adams. He said, if you've got a book of poetry in your pocket, you've got a friend. You know, and it's just like, yeah, that's true. You know, you always get something back when you read.
Yeah. And one of the great things about writing and being a novelist is that you use everything that you have in your quiver. You use all your arrows, everything you've ever seen, every person you ever met, every emotion you ever experienced, any food you ever tasted, every story you ever heard. It's all in this cauldron that you pluck from and use it. And it uses up your whole self. It uses all aspects of yourself when you're writing fiction. It uses your secrets. It uses your family. It uses your friends. It uses your dreams and your aspirations. So, and any other thing I've done, I've been a newspaper reporter and a freelance writer, and some horrible manual labor jobs that I had back in the day when I was being a teamster and hustling freight to work my way through college. But you know, all this, none of this stuff was engaging everything of me. There are parts of myself that I never touched. That when you're writing a novel, everything gets touched and used.
Yeah. When you write your next book, if you decide that your character decides for you, I don't know exactly how you balance that part, but let's just say that your character decides, hey, I come from Aqaba, you know, and in Jordan. Do you have to go to Aqaba to do that? Or can you just research? Or are you like, no, you don't. You come from Poughkeepsie. I've been there. You know, what do you do when a character comes from a place that you don't know?
Well, I Google is what I do.
Okay. Good.
Book research or any kind of research was really tough. When I was first in the newspaper business, was before Google, I guess, and before computers became ubiquitous. And when you needed to know something, you had to go to the library or make a telephone call. And I used to have just stacks of reference books in my apartment that I used, whatever sorts of encyclopedias and baseball encyclopedia and Skeet's etymological dictionary and all sorts of things, because it wasn't online. It was in libraries, so you had to do it. But nowadays, it's easy to do that kind of research. If you want to make a scene, for example, my previous novel, Fail, which is about the public schools and the corruption of the city government in St. Louis, we had a scene taking place in the mayor's office where I had been once years ago, but I couldn't remember what it was looking out of the windows of the office, and I wanted to put that in, what the view was, except I was writing the novel from Key West at that time. But what I got on was to Google Earth and went there and found City Hall in St. Louis, a beautiful old pink granite building, and went up to, I knew where the mayor's office was, and got to view, looking out his window across the park to the city library and the Soldiers Memorial. And I could just write that. Just sit at my desk, I can get that view off the computer. And with this book that I've just finished, or just been published, The Bootlegger's Bride, I was able to go back and get a lot of that kind of stuff from archival information. It's all there. The daily newspaper, the last daily existent in St. Louis now, is the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, which is an old newspaper. But I subscribed to the archives. And when I put something in the book as to what the weather was that day, what was in the headlines in the newspaper, what was going on in the world, it's all accurate. It's all deeply researched, because it's easy to do that kind of research these days. You just got to spend a little time. There's a lot of sources out there, and you can travel and go all over and see what things look like and what streets look like, and see what historical people look like and so forth. So that makes a lot of. I used to hate doing research because it was so tedious, But now it's interesting now because sometimes it alerts you to new vectors for your novel. You find out stuff that you didn't really know about or didn't consider, but you start doing some research. Can I give you an example?
Please. Yeah.
In the book we have this main character. The book is about AJ Nowak. That's his book. He's the orphan son of the bootlegger's bride and the bootlegger. And so I was doing my research, and I have him go into his parents' book and his bookshelves of his late parents and trying to find books. So he starts pulling out Tom Jones and Jane Eyre and other books about orphans, Huckleberry Finn. So I started doing research myself on orphans and found out there's so many notable orphans in history and in the world and in literature, from Moses to Huck Finn, people who came down the river, and Aristotle, Eleanor Roosevelt, Madame Curie, plus fictional characters I mentioned like Tom Jones and Jane Eyre and Tarzan and Superman, all orphans. And so there's a certain thing that orphans share besides being orphans, is that they're on their own. They have to rely on themselves. So it builds up a certain resilience and independence and a fighting spirit, I think, that makes a lot of them into exceptional people.
Yeah, that's great. I love that whole philosophy. I'm actually going to keep that and use that. It's not just people, it's experiences and events too. That right, World War II continues to be tied to stories, movies, books, histories. It seems to be the epic of all humanity. You know, we just can't ever escape what it means, that conflict means. It's us.
Yeah. And pivotal, World War II is pivotal in this novel because it's where the bootlegger is killed in the D-Day invasion. And it's something that all men in my day had to deal with when I was in the Vietnam era, but
sure.
you had to deal with conscription and whether you want to succumb to that and whether you feel the spirit to do that and whether you think it's a worthwhile fight. And so this novel, to certain degrees, has some anti-war sentiment in it, where these guys,
sure,
these working class guys, are concerned about that because, you know, what's going on in Europe and or in Japan, the Japanese aren't going to come and bomb St. Louis, or the Panzers aren't rolling up Grand Avenue, you know. So it's like, this is not my fight, you know. And you look at it's the fight of the people who are working for the people who are making tanks and whatnot, because his father was grandfather's working at a steel mill. So it's a different, it's something the men have to contend with and have for history.
Yeah, and that is a unchanging thing, right? The people who try to survive and live are the ones that are sent to these places to go fight these fights to these folks that benefit from the fight, or if they lose, get taken out of power. But still, there's this exchange of power, and the people on the ground are left to do it. Elvis Costello's got a great song called Shipbuilding. It's kind of about that, where like if you want to get stuff for your kids for Christmas, it's a good thing there's a war, because now you can go get a job and build ships and all these kinds of things that happen. And it's a great premise again for how we see the world and what we ask of each other, and what we might ask, if we went the other direction, if the other direction is possible. It sure seems like we like to send poor people to war still, no matter what we do.
And in the case of Jan Nowak in the novel, it wasn't just his life, it was the life of his wife and child too, that he had to be concerned about, because he had to think about them too. If he went off to war and was killed as he was, and it devastated his wife in the process, and led to her demise as well. Of
course, these things are awful. I call that the war dragon. The war dragon just consumes who it consumes, and it's just, you release it, and it's a vicious thing, right? And so death, exploitation, whatever it's going to be, all these bad things come from it. And I appreciate you digging in with that. Everybody, the book is called The Bootlegger's Bride. Here is the link down below. You guys know what I say all the time, buddy read. I mean, one of the best gifts I get to go to give that person. Give them a book. Books are great, and reading is great. And the Bootlegger's Bride, I haven't made it all the way through it yet. I'll be honest about that. But what I've read has been wonderful. It's hard for me to keep up, man. No excuse for me, but I can't sit down and read all these books from all these great authors. But I want to talk to you all because usually I read enough, and I think you'll get this. I read enough about the book to get a sense for what I want to talk about, and then we don't even talk about that. We talk about all these other marvelous things.
Yeah,
but
right.
I really have treasured this. It's thank you, and we'll read it some more.
Well, thank you, Pete. It's been a joy talking with you. Enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, and as soon as you get another book done, always come back. I always want to be a part of your megaphone to get the message out there. I mean, anybody who's doing this thing for the love, you've got all my support. I love what you're doing. Anything in closing before we wrap this up?
Okay. Now, if people need to learn more, they can go to my website, rickskwiot.com. There it is.
There it is. There's a link. You guys see it? Ding, 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 ding. Go do that. You guys know how to do this. Rick Skwiot. You guys will figure it out. And if not, get a hold of me. I think I got one more show for you guys later on today if I get myself together. Rick, thank you very much. I'll say goodbye to you in a second. Everybody else, hopefully I'll see you in about 2 hours.